In House of the Dragon, the Strongs are probably one of the most important families during this time period. If their position as Lords of Harrenhal, the largest castle in the realm, is not what gives them such notoriety, then it's definitely their steady rise to influence over the Targaryen court. Lyonel Strong serves as Master of Laws before he takes on the role of Hand of the King once Otto Hightower is dismissed. Lyonel Strong gets quite close to Queen Alicent, and for a time serves as the unofficial Master of Whispers before he's given the official position by Aegon. And Harwin Strong is probably the most important out of the bunch, taking on Daemon's old role as Commander of the City Watch, then becoming a lover to the princess and heir to the Iron Throne, and also the unspoken father of her first 3 children. It almost sounds ludicrous that House Targaryen at its apex in power would get so heavily involved and intertwined with a family that is really just up and coming in the Riverlands, and the only thing they have to their name is really a large castle that's in a constant state of disrepair. Yet, that's what happens, and each member is closer to the Targaryen family than any other family could ever dream of. But today's focus is going to be on the previous Lord of Harrenhal, Lyonel. Lyonel Strong is a very important character in House of the Dragon. Out of everyone in Viserys' court, Lyonel Strong seemed to be one of the only people who really tried to look out for King Viserys. He wasn't led by personal ambitions or secretive plots. He genuinely tries helping the guy when he's struggling, and unfortunately for all his selfless efforts, he gets torched by his own son, who wants to help the queen and get Harrenhal in the process. This opens up Otto Hightower coming back and the Greens really securing their stronghold in King's Landing. But what if this hadn't happened? How could the story change if Lyonel Strong, who may well be one of the king's only real supporters, lived? Let's find out. So the first thing we really need to tackle here is how exactly does Lyonel Strong live in this alternate history? Do we assume he survives the fire at Harrenhal? And if so, does Harwin? If not, and he survives while Harwin doesn't, this could very well result in a timeline where he resigns out of grief instead of death, and then we're back to square one. Now, he would technically live in that scenario, and there would be some changes, but not the kind that I envision for this particular scenario. The simplest explanation that I can find for his survival is that amidst all the rumors and shadows that hover over their family, he chooses not to leave King's Landing like he did in canon. He decides to stand by King Viserys, and by extension his grandsons, even as things grow more tense in the capital. Instead, he only opts to send his sons back to Harrenhal, which serves a few purposes for the scenario. He sends Harwin back to distance him from the princess and her sons, preventing more rumors from sprouting about them given how close they are to each other, and stopping people from staring too long at the resemblance between the commander of the City Watch and the heirs to the throne in Driftmark. Sending Larys away also ensures that Lyonel will survive, as if he just sends Harwin back, Larys is still in a position to remove his father from life. Nothing would stop him from gathering his prisoners, turning them into fireflies, and still managing to burn Harwin if he wants to inherit Harrenhal. And who's to say that he can't just bribe a servant to off his dad if he really wants to vacate the hand position for Alicent's father? So it's best to remove him from the situation altogether. Make sure he's far away from all of his assets. He has no power or connections at Harrenhal, and it will be much harder to make moves at court if he isn't there and not in the company of the queen. Now, while that's my personal reasoning for removing him, Lyonel's reasoning for sending Larys away will be 2 things. 1, he wants Harwin to have some company on the trip back home, and someone who he potentially can confide in outside of Simon, who is closer to him in the family tree, and someone he seems to have more of a connection and friendship with, who could potentially advise him. After all, Harwin and Larys seem to get along well enough before the family barbecue, so maybe they can look out for each other at Harrenhal. And with both gone, there's less chance for either of them to be used as a reference point for Rhaenyra's sons. So this enables Lyonel to continue his business without being under much threat and stress of being found out. Now, episode 6 will play out basically the same way, even with Lyonel's survival in this timeline. The events are largely unaffected by his life and demise until later on anyway. Rhaenyra would still take her family and relocate to Dragonstone in an effort to get away from the rumors at court. Lyonel stays on as Hand of the King, even during the later events of episode 7. And this entire episode, I believe, largely stays the same, even with the addition of Lord Strong. We deal with the fallout of Laena's death, and the grief of those who cared for her. We are spared the sadness of Harwin's death, however, and this is especially noticeable in Rhaenyra's sons. While they aren't happy at their cousin's mother's funeral, they aren't nearly as miserable as before. Lucerys seems more open to the prospect of taking over Driftmark when Corlys speaks to him at the funeral, now that he doesn't have to bear the weight of losing an aunt and father figure at the same time. Jacaerys, unburdened by sorrow, also takes a more proactive approach when it comes to Baela and Rhaena. Originally, he essentially had to hide the way he felt for the sake of keeping up appearances, and he even had to be pushed by Rhaenyra to comfort his cousins, given that he was dealing with his own trauma. But with Harwin alive, he doesn't need that much encouragement to go to them and be a fond presence. Aemond will still end up claiming Vhagar as long as Laena's death stays the same. This will result in the fight in the cave that quickly escalates when Aemond calls Jace a bastard. Even if Harwin is alive in this timeline, Jace's heritage is still a very sore topic for him, and he still has that insecurity. So if he gets into a fight, then has it thrown in his face that he's not a real Targaryen and that he's a bastard, he is pulling out that knife, and Lucerys will, like before, cut Aemond's eye out in defense of his older brother when he gets the chance and gets his hand on the blade. This makes for a much more tense scene when it comes to Alicent and Rhaenyra's confrontation, as Lyonel has to sit in contemplation and judgment of his own family, and he has to wonder as the conflict goes on if today is the day that all the truths come to light. The moment Aegon basically speaks it aloud, that everyone knows the truth, and all they need to do is look, Lyonel's heart would be going 1,000 miles a minute, while he does what he can to hold his composure. And then things ramp up when Alicent lunges at Rhaenyra, demanding the eye of Lucerys. I can see Lyonel being in a very conflicted place when he sees this. On the one hand, considering Westeros, he might be able to argue that Alicent is somewhat justified in this response, given that the children are indeed bastards and he knows it. They've done much worse to people of lower standing, like cutting off limbs for stealing apples. It doesn't make it right in the slightest, don't get me wrong, but that's how they operate. But on the flip side, there's this desire to defend and protect them, given that they're not just children, but his grandchildren, and he doesn't want them harmed in any way. It's why he sent Harwin away and also didn't expose the truth when he clearly could have. So now he's torn on how to act. He wants to solve the situation, but he doesn't know how to without potentially incriminating himself and making things worse for the boys. And that's of course disregarding the fact that there really isn't much power he has in the situation to begin with. If Alicent was willing to go against an order from the king himself, and everyone else in the room was hesitant to even touch the queen and heir, while they grapple for fear of harming them and committing treason themselves as a result, then he has no choice but to let things play out. And it will go the same way with Rhaenyra having her arm slashed and a new divide in the family. Afterwards, to strengthen her claim and position when it comes to the throne, I imagine that she'll still fake the death of Laenor and marry her uncle Daemon. I doubt she'll seek out Harwin Strong as a husband, even if he is still alive, as it would be more detrimental to her claim and those of her children if she did this. People already suspect her sons of being illegitimate, so immediately marrying Harwin, then potentially producing more dark-haired children, would just add more fuel to the fire. And this isn't even mentioning the other benefits of marrying Daemon. He's a Targaryen, the king's brother, and a seasoned warrior and dragon rider who has notoriety throughout the entire realm, and across the Narrow Sea. It's a powerful move that offers her much more in the long run. In the meantime, as the story drags on, it's in the final episodes of Season 1 that I believe that we would see the most changes to the story as the king's health declines. In the absence of Otto Hightower as Hand of the King, we see Lyonel come to the forefront when it comes to court and politics. In canon, this was a shared duty between Alicent and her father, but with him still in Old Town, even if she is the queen, a lot of the political matters will fall to Lyonel since his position does state that he's arguably the man the king trusts the most. With this knowledge, Vaemond wouldn't make his bid for Driftmark after Corlys is injured and thought to be dying. With this knowledge, Vaemond wouldn't make his bid for Driftmark after Corlys is injured in the Stepstones and thought to be dying. In canon, this made sense because Vaemond actually had a feasible chance at victory. He held no real love or respect for the Strong Boys given their origins, and after Laena's funeral, it was clear that the Hightowers seemed to feel the same way. And with King Viserys ailing and his wife and her father dominating the court for years, it seemed like the perfect time and place for him to make his move and potentially garner more allies. But with Lyonel in charge, he'll be forced to rethink things. He already knows that Rhaenyra's oldest sons are of strong stock, so going to King's Landing in an attempt to undermine them in front of not just the court, but their grandfather, who isn't rotting away on his deathbed, would not be a good idea. Vaemond would still definitely want to do something about Driftmark's succession, but as it stands right now, he doesn't have many or any real reasonable cards to play. Without the interference of Vaemond, though, this would likely mean that we don't get the Last Supper of King Viserys, because as unfortunate as it is to say, Rhaenyra didn't seem to bother coming back home during the past 6 years. It was only when her son was in danger that she decided to return. So one could reasonably assume that without these plots to take Driftmark, she would stay on Dragonstone until the death of her father. However, I would argue, even with that being said, that Lyonel at some point during the years that King Viserys is ailing in health would invite Rhaenyra back to court so she could be with her father and start getting ready to rule the realm one day. Unlike Otto Hightower, I don't think Lyonel Strong would be fine with Rhaenyra isolating herself on an island while her father is dying, and it's clear that he has no chance of recovering. He's not trying to secure King's Landing for Aegon, so when it's clear Viserys is failing in health, he will urge Rhaenyra to come home with speed. And when the king finally dies, we can settle who will take up his crown. Now, once the king dies, and if we assume that Lyonel finds out first, he'll be faced with the decision on what to do next. It's funny, because in the beginning of the story, he was completely opposed to Rhaenyra being named heir to the Iron Throne. He actually laughs at the idea, thinking it's utterly ridiculous, and even says that it would destabilize the realm if they allowed it to happen. But as the years pass in Hot D, not once does he ever seem to raise the issue of the king's succession after the decision is made, even after he has a living son. Multiple living sons, in fact. He still does his best to help the king and advise him on the best matches for Rhaenyra, even before he becomes hand. Now, he might have advised Viserys to name Aegon at one point and we just didn't see it, but after Viserys most likely refused, he never seems to bring it up again. However, the point stands that he never openly made a move against Rhaenyra after she was made heir, and especially after she got involved with his son. So I think it stands to reason that with the death of the king, he would push for Rhaenyra and see that she takes the Iron Throne with no issue. The only one who would be opposed to this is Alicent, but she would be more alone in court than she has been in years. With her father gone, she has no one to back her up besides Criston Cole, since Otto was apparently the main one after Driftmark trying to make moves to make Aegon king. Meanwhile, in his absence, Lyonel has had plenty of time to bring the court to heel and secure things, maybe even replacing council members who might have supported Alicent if she sought them out. And considering how Alicent seems very unwilling to take more violent measures to get what she wants, I find it unlikely that she'll use Criston Cole as a way to force Aegon's ascent by killing the opposition, like when he killed Lyman Beesbury. So Rhaenyra will most likely become queen, and I don't see a dance happening given how few resources the Greens have now, especially with Alicent doing everything she can to keep her hands clean. Though with that being said, it's also possible that during these years at court, she and Rhaenyra would eventually make amends like they did in the canon timeline at some point. Since apparently all it took was one speech from Rhaenyra to make her forget all of her animosity towards her and her family. So maybe we don't need to worry about her starting trouble, and we already know that Aegon doesn't really want to be king anyway, so he'll gladly let sleeping dogs lie. The only person who might potentially start trouble in the future could be Aemond, given that he was not willing to let go of a missing eye, and the fact that he'll be ruled by a bastard one day. Though even with Vhagar, it might be a challenge to rally support for a second son over the first, who has the stronger claim. But maybe the old iguana is enough incentive, in and of herself, if he chooses to go that route. So, if Lyonel Strong lives, then it could very well be a timeline where Rhaenyra ascends the throne peacefully, and the dance is avoided. At least for a time. I'm sure it'll happen eventually, knowing the Targs. But that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, tell me your thoughts down below, and I will see you all next time.